Edward Gray stood at the edge of his porch, the Nebraska sky roiling with dark, menacing clouds. A strange energy hung in the air, the kind that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. At 68 years old, Ed had seen his fair share of storms, but this one was different, silent yet oppressive, as if the world was holding its breath. Then, through the darkness, a brilliant flash of light split the sky, followed by a shockwave that rattled the windows of his modest farmhouse. Ed tightened his grip on the porch railing, squinting into the downpour. That's when he saw her. At first it was just a shadow, stumbling through the field beyond his barn. As the figure drew closer, the light from his porch illuminated her form. A young woman, drenched and trembling, with eyes that seemed to shimmer like molten silver. She clutched her side, blood seeping through her fingers, and collapsed just a few feet from his steps. "Good Lord," Ed muttered, grabbing his coat. He hurried to her side, his boots sinking into the muddy ground. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, and she whispered something in a language he didn't recognize. It wasn't just the words, it was the sound itself, like music layered with static. Despite not understanding, Ed felt an urgency in her tone. "Don't worry," he said gently. "I'll get you inside." He lifted her easily, years of farm work leaving him stronger than most men his age. As he carried her into the house, the storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling as if in protest. Ed laid the young woman on his couch, grabbing a clean towel and his first aid kit. Up close, it was clear she wasn't like anyone he'd ever seen. Her skin, though pale, had a faint iridescent sheen. Her hair, a cascade of silver, seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of his living room. But it was her eyes that struck him most, large, expressive, and filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Let's get you patched up," Ed muttered, carefully pulling back her torn jacket. The wound on her side was deep, the flesh beneath glowing faintly. He hesitated, unsure if his basic medical supplies would even work on someone like her. "Thank you," she murmured suddenly, her voice soft but clear. Ed blinked. "You speak English?" She nodded weakly. "I learn quickly. Your kindness is appreciated." "Well, you're welcome," Ed said, wrapping her wound as best he could. "Name's Edward Gray, by the way. Most folks just call me Ed." "Leah," she said. "I am Leah." Ed sat back, rubbing his hands on his jeans. "All right, Leah. Mind telling me what you're doing out here? Or why you look like you fell out of the sky?" Leah hesitated, her silver eyes darting to the window, as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. "I am hunted. They seek to silence me." "Hunted?" Ed repeated, his brow furrowing. "By who?" Her gaze locked onto his. "By those who fear what I know." Over the next few days, Leah remained in Ed's home, regaining her strength. Despite her initial wariness, she gradually began to open up. She was a researcher from a distant world, sent to study the interconnectedness of life across galaxies. But her discoveries, especially those about Earth, had made her a target. "They fear the truth," she explained one evening, sitting at Ed's kitchen table. "That all life, no matter how different, shares common threads. Unity threatens their control." Ed listened, his weathered face thoughtful. He wasn't sure he understood everything she was saying, but her sincerity was unmistakable. "Sounds like you've got yourself in a heap of trouble." Leah nodded. "I did not intend to involve you. I am sorry." "Don't be," Ed said firmly. "You needed help, and I ain't the kind to turn someone away. Besides," he gestured to the quiet farmhouse around them. "Not much excitement around here. You're the most interesting thing that's happened in years." Leah tilted her head, her expression softening. "Your kindness is rare. I am grateful." "I am..." As days turned into weeks, Leah began to adjust to life on Earth. She helped Ed with the farm, her curiosity about human customs and tools often leading to amusing misunderstandings. "Why do you grow so much food when you consume so little?" she asked one morning, examining the rows of corn with a puzzled expression. "Most of it goes to market," Ed explained, wiping sweat from his brow. "Folks in town buy it, and I use the money to keep this place running." Leah nodded slowly, though her silver eyes still held a hint of confusion. "Your systems are inefficient." Ed chuckled. "Maybe, but it works." Despite her otherworldly appearance, Leah blended surprisingly well into the quiet rhythms of farm life. Yet as time passed, Ed noticed subtle changes in her demeanor: restlessness, a heightened sensitivity to sounds and scents. When he asked if she was all right, she would simply smile and say, "I am fine." But Ed knew better. Something was happening. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Leah finally confessed. "My species undergoes cycles," she said hesitantly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "During this time, our biology intensifies certain instincts." Ed frowned. "What kind of instincts?" Leah hesitated, her iridescent skin flushing faintly. "To bond, to seek companionship." Ed leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You're saying this is part of your mating season?" She nodded, avoiding his gaze. "It is an inconvenience. I'm doing my best to suppress it." Ed cleared his throat, his cheeks reddening slightly. "Well, I appreciate that." Despite the awkwardness, the conversation deepened their understanding of each other. For Leah, it was a chance to share her vulnerabilities. For Ed, it was a reminder of the complexity and fragility of the being he had chosen to protect. Days turned into weeks, and life on the farm settled into an uneasy routine. Leah continued to assist Ed with the chores, her curiosity about Earth customs often breaking the silence of their work. However, the tension lingered. Despite her efforts to suppress it, her cycle seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Ed noticed the changes: her heightened sensitivity to touch, the way her silver eyes lingered on him for a moment too long, and her frequent absences during the night. When he confronted her about it, she deflected, insisting that she was merely adjusting to human rhythms. But Ed wasn't a fool. He could see she was struggling with something far greater than homesickness or fear. The storm came again, one night as they were finishing dinner. A low rumble shook the farmhouse, rattling the windows and sending Leah stiffening in her chair. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ed frowned. "Who's here?" "The hunters," she replied, her gaze darting to the window. "They've found me." Before Ed could react, a brilliant beam of light cut through the night, illuminating the fields beyond the barn. Shadows moved within the glow, tall, sleek figures that moved with inhuman grace. Leah grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You must hide. They will not harm you if they do not see you with me." "Hide? In my own house?" Ed barked, pulling his arm free. "Not a chance. If they want you, they'll have to get through me first." "Edward, please," Leah pleaded, her silver eyes wide with fear. Ed grabbed his shotgun from the corner of the room, loading it with the calm precision of a man who had faced his share of threats. "They don't know who they're messing with." The hunters descended on the farmhouse, their sleek forms gliding through the fields. Their weapons emitted low, humming pulses of energy that scorched the earth wherever they landed. But Ed knew the terrain better than anyone, using the shadows and tall crops to his advantage. Leah, despite her protests, couldn't bear to leave him alone. She joined the fight, her alien physiology granting her agility and speed that matched the hunters. Together, they held their ground, forcing the invaders to retreat into the fields. When the battle ended, Ed stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, his chest heaving with exertion. Beside him, Leah clutched her side, her glowing wound reopening. "You're bleeding again," Ed said, his voice soft but firm. "Let's get you patched up." The peace didn't last long. The hunters returned in greater numbers, their sleek crafts descending upon the fields like dark, silent predators. This time there was no room for retreat. Ed and Leah had to make a stand, or risk losing everything. As the hunters surrounded the farmhouse, Leah made a decision. She activated a small device hidden within her belongings, sending a signal into the night sky. "What's that?" Ed asked, his shotgun ready. "A call for help," Leah replied. "From the Intergalactic Council. They will come, if we can hold out long enough." Ed nodded, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "Then let's give them something to find." The hunters moved like shadows in the night, their sleek forms nearly invisible save for the faint glint of their weapons in the moonlight. Ed and Leah had fortified the farmhouse as best they could, barricading windows, setting traps, and securing the perimeter with whatever tools and weapons Ed had on hand. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "They'll come from the east first," Leah said, her voice steady despite the tension in her posture. "Their formations are predictable." Ed smirked, crouching behind an overturned table with his shotgun in hand. "Good, makes it easier for me to aim." "Edward," Leah began, her silver eyes meeting his, "you do not have to do this. If I surrender, they will leave you unharmed." He shook his head, his voice firm. "Not a chance. I didn't invite you into my home just to hand you over to a pack of bullies." Leah's lips parted slightly, an expression of both gratitude and disbelief. She placed a hand over his, her touch cool but comforting. "Then we faced them together." The first wave came swiftly, their energy pulses lighting up the fields. Ed's traps, tripwires rigged with old farm equipment and a few improvised explosives, slowed them down, but not for long. The hunters adapted quickly, their precision and agility making them formidable adversaries. Ed fired his shotgun with practiced ease, the recoil familiar and satisfying. Each shot forced the hunters to scatter, buying Leah time to use her own alien weapon, a sleek crystalline device that emitted bursts of concentrated light. Together, they formed an unlikely but effective team. Despite their efforts, the hunters pressed closer, their movements relentless. The farmhouse walls shuddered under the force of their energy blasts, and Ed could feel the heat of the battle rising around them. "Leah," he shouted over the chaos, "that signal of yours better bring help soon." "It will," she replied, her voice resolute. "We just have to hold on." The turning point came with a brilliant flash of light that cut through the night sky. A massive vessel, unlike anything Ed had ever seen, descended above the farmhouse. Its hull gleamed with iridescent colors, and its sheer size cast a shadow over the battlefield. The hunters froze, their sleek forms suddenly hesitant. From the vessel, beams of light shot down, surrounding the farmhouse and forcing the hunters back. The air was filled with a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Leah exhaled, relief washing over her. The council. Ed lowered his shotgun but didn't relax entirely. "They friendly?" "To me, yes," Leah said, stepping forward, "and I will ensure they mean no harm to you." The hunters retreated as several figures descended from the vessel, their forms tall and elegant, adorned in flowing robes that shimmered with every step. Their leader, a being with glowing violet eyes and a calm but commanding presence, approached Leah and Ed. "Researcher Leah," the leader said, their voice both musical and authoritative. "You have caused quite a stir." Leah straightened, her voice steady. "I did what was necessary to preserve the knowledge I have gathered." The leader's gaze shifted to Ed, their expression unreadable. "And this human? He has aided you?" "He has done more than that," Leah replied, her tone fierce. "Edward Grey has shown the best of humanity, kindness, resilience, and courage. Without him, I would not have survived." The leader regarded Ed for a long moment before nodding. "Then he has our gratitude." The council offered Leah safe passage to one of their protected worlds, where she could continue her research without fear of persecution. But as they prepared to leave, Leah hesitated. She stood in the farmhouse, her silver eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. The worn wooden beams, the scent of earth and rain, and the quiet strength of the man who had offered her shelter without question. "Leah," Ed said, his voice soft, "this is your chance to go somewhere safe, somewhere you can be free." She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "And leave behind the first being who ever truly understood me." Ed's throat tightened and he looked away. "I'm just an old man on a farm." "You deserve more than this." Leah smiled, the gesture soft but resolute. "What I deserve is my choice, and I choose to stay." The council respected Leah's decision, though they warned her of the challenges she would face adapting to life on Earth. To ease the transition, they provided her with a device that would gradually align her biology with human norms. allowing her to live among them without fear of her cycles causing disruption. As the council's ship departed, the fields returned to their quiet stillness. Ed and Leah stood on the porch watching the stars fade into the dawn. "So," Ed said after a long silence, "guess you're stuck with me now." Leah laughed, the sound light and melodic. "It seems so." Ed smiled, his weathered face softening. "We'll make it work." Leah looked at him, her silver eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Together we will." Leah's decision to stay marked a new chapter in both her life and Ed's. The farmhouse, once a quiet sanctuary, now became a place of shared discovery. Leah, with her unrelenting curiosity, dove into understanding the intricacies of human life, while Ed found himself learning about her culture in ways he never expected. Leah's adaptation device, a sleek bracelet provided by the council, gradually stabilized her alien biology. It muted the more intense effects of her mating cycle, allowing her to focus on integrating into her new home. "I must admit," Leah said one evening, as she studied an old human cookbook Ed had dusted off for her, "your species' reliance on such varied forms of sustenance is fascinating. Entire books dedicated to preparation and consumption." Ed chuckled from his chair by the fire. "Cooking's more than survival, Leah. It's an art, and sometimes a way of bringing folks together." Leah tilted her head thoughtfully. "Perhaps I should attempt it." "Go for it," Ed said, hiding a smirk. "Just don't burn the place down." Her eyes narrowed in mock offense. "Edward, I am quite capable of following instructions." "Well, we'll see," Ed teased, earning a faint laugh from Leah. Weeks passed in relative peace, but the simplicity of their life together was shattered when Ed found signs of trespassers near the outer edges of his property. At first, it was just footprints, too large and irregular to belong to any local wildlife. Then, one night, a faint hum filled the air, reminiscent of the hunter's weapons. "They're watching us," Ed said grimly, examining the trampled cornfield under the pale moonlight. Leah stood beside him, her silver eyes scanning the darkness. "The hunters may have left, but others will come. My presence here remains a threat." Ed set his jaw, gripping his shotgun tightly. "Then we'll deal with them. Same as before." "Edward," Leah began softly, placing a hand on his arm, "you should not have to risk yourself because of me." "I told you before," Ed said, his voice steady. "You're not facing this alone. Not while I'm still breathing." Leah's expression softened, her trust in him unshakable. "Then we must prepare." Ed and Leah spent the next few days reinforcing the farmhouse. Ed's practical ingenuity combined with Leah's advanced knowledge made for a formidable team. They set up motion detectors using parts from the council's device and dug trenches around the perimeter of the fields. Ed even rigged an old tractor with makeshift armor to act as a decoy. As they worked, their bond deepened. Leah's admiration for Ed's resourcefulness grew, while Ed marveled at her ability to adapt so seamlessly to his world. "You'd make a decent farmer," Ed said one afternoon as they reinforced the barn doors. Leah smiled faintly. "And you would make a formidable researcher." Ed laughed, the sound carrying through the quiet fields. "I think I'll stick to corn and cattle." Their defenses were tested sooner than they'd hoped. One night, the faint hum returned, accompanied by flashes of light on the horizon. Leah stood on the porch, her iridescent skin glowing faintly as she activated the motion detectors. "They are here," she said, her voice calm but firm. Ed joined her, shotgun in hand. "Let's give him a warm Nebraska welcome." The attackers were not hunters, but mercenaries. Humans working for a galactic faction interested in capturing Leah for profit. They were armed with advanced weapons, but lacked the precision and discipline of the hunters. Ed and Leah exploited their weaknesses, using the traps and defenses they'd built to outmaneuver them. Leah's agility and alien weaponry proved invaluable, while Ed's steady aim and tactical instincts kept them one step ahead. The battle was intense but brief, the mercenaries retreating under the weight of their losses. As the last of them disappeared into the night, Ed leaned against the porch railing, breathing heavily. "That wasn't so bad." Leah raised an eyebrow. "You were nearly vaporized twice." "Nearly," Ed said with a grin. Keyword. Leah shook her head but couldn't hide her smile. "You are impossible." After the siege, life on the farm returned to a fragile normalcy. Ed and Leah fell into an easy rhythm, their relationship deepening as they spent more time together. Leah's adjustment device was working seamlessly now, allowing her to fully embrace her new life on Earth. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Leah broke the comfortable silence. "Edward, have you ever considered leaving this place?" Ed looked at her surprised. "Leave? The farm? This is my home, Leah." She nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight. "I understand, but there is a vast universe beyond this. I wonder if you have ever desired to see it." Ed leaned back, considering her words. "Maybe when I was younger. Now, I'm happy right here. Besides, I don't need to go to the stars. I've got my own little piece of the galaxy sitting right here with me." Leah's expression softened, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable. The council returned once more, this time to deliver a final warning. Leah's presence on Earth would continue to attract attention, and she would need to decide whether to stay or accept their offer of sanctuary on a distant world. "I am staying," Leah said firmly, standing beside Ed on the porch as the council representatives listened. "This is my home now." The council leader inclined their head. "Very well. We will provide what resources we can to ensure your safety. But be vigilant. Your journey is far from over." As the council's ship disappeared into the sky, Ed turned to Leah, his expression thoughtful. "You sure about this? Staying here? Dealing with all this trouble?" Leah smiled, her silver eyes meeting his. "I have never been more certain. This is where I belong." Ed nodded, his weathered face softening. "Then let's get to work." Together they rebuilt the farm, turning it into a sanctuary not just for themselves, but for the life they'd forged together. In time, the visits from mercenaries and hunters dwindled, deterred by the defenses and the quiet strength of the unlikely pair who called the farmhouse home. Under the vast Nebraska sky, Edward Gray and Leah found something extraordinary. A life built on trust, resilience, and an unbreakable connection that transcended worlds. Life on the farm settled into a steady rhythm after the council's visit. With their defenses in place and the mercenaries seemingly deterred, Ed and Leah found themselves enjoying moments of quiet they hadn't experienced in months. Leah's adjustment device was now fully integrated, allowing her to live as comfortably on Earth as any human. She helped Ed with the daily chores, often surprising him with her efficiency and ingenuity. "Don't tell me you've grown to like farming," Ed teased one afternoon as they worked side by side in the cornfields. Leah smiled, the faint shimmer of her iridescent skin catching the sunlight. "It is fulfilling, predictable, yet rewarding. I find it peaceful." "Peaceful," Ed repeated with a chuckle. "Never thought I'd hear you say that." Leah paused, looking toward the horizon, where the fields stretched endlessly under a clear blue sky. "I have learned to appreciate the simplicity of this life. It is a far cry from the chaos I left behind." Ed leaned on his hoe, his weathered face softening. "Well, you've got a knack for it. I'll give you that." For the first time since she'd arrived, Leah felt as though she truly belonged. But deep down, she knew peace was fragile, and the galaxy's interest in her might not be gone forever. It was a crisp autumn morning when the next surprise arrived. Ed was repairing a section of the barn roof while Leah harvested vegetables from the garden when a faint hum filled the air. They both froze, exchanging a wary glance. "Another ship," Ed muttered, climbing down the ladder. Leah's silver eyes narrowed as a sleek vessel descended into the field. Unlike the hunter's crafts or the council's ship, this one was smaller, more compact. Its hull bore no markings, and its design was unfamiliar even to Leah. The ramp lowered, and a single figure emerged. It was a tall alien, their skin a deep shimmering gold, with sharp angular features and eyes that glowed faintly. They held no weapon, their hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Leah," the figure said, their voice melodic and calm. "I am Arvel, an envoy sent to observe." "Observe what?" Leah asked, stepping forward but keeping a cautious distance. "The choices you have made," Arvel replied, their gaze shifting to Ed. and the life you have chosen to build. Ed crossed his arms, his stance protective. If you're here to take her, you can turn right back around. Arvel smiled faintly. I am not here to take anyone. I am here to understand. Leah tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. Understand what? Arvel gestured to the farmhouse, the fields, and the two of them standing together. You, a being of advanced intellect and capabilities, have chosen to remain on a primitive planet. And you, they said, turning to Ed, have risked your life to protect someone you barely knew. Why? Leah glanced at Ed, who shrugged. She needed help. Seemed like the right thing to do. And I stayed because... Leah hesitated, her voice softening. Because I found something here I could not find anywhere else. Connection. Purpose. Arvel nodded, their glowing eyes thoughtful. You are both remarkable, in ways your galaxy does not yet understand. I will report what I have seen to my superiors, but know this. Your bond has sent ripples through the stars. You are no longer just individuals. You are symbols of something greater. Ed frowned. That's supposed to be comforting. In time, Arvel replied cryptically, you may find it to be. With that, they returned to their ship, leaving as swiftly as they had come. Epilogue. Under the stars. That night, Ed and Leah sat on the porch, the faint hum of the departing ship still echoing in their minds. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, their light casting a gentle glow over the fields. Think they'll come back? Ed asked, breaking the silence. They might, Leah replied, her voice steady. But I do not fear them. Ed nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Whatever comes, we'll handle it, together. Leah turned to him, her expression softening. Together. For the first time in years, Ed felt truly content. The farmhouse was no longer just his, it was theirs, a sanctuary forged in the chaos of the galaxy, but rooted in the quiet strength of their bond. And under the vast Nebraska sky, they watched the stars, ready to face whatever the universe had in store. Ed, though growing older, never slowed down. He worked the fields with the same determination he'd always had, though now he did so with Leah by his side. Together, they cultivated not only the land, but also a life filled with understanding and trust. One day, as Ed sat in his favorite chair by the fire, a worn journal open in his lap, Leah approached with a question she had long kept to herself. Edward, she began, her voice hesitant. Do you ever wish for more? He looked up, his eyes softening. More? To see the galaxy, Leah said, gesturing toward the stars visible through the window. To explore what lies beyond this world. Ed smiled, setting the journal aside. Leah, I've already seen more than I ever thought I would, and I've got everything I need right here. She sat beside him, her hand brushing his. You are certain? Ed nodded. This farm, this life, it's where I belong, and as long as you're here, it's enough. Leah's expression softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly believe that she had found a home, not just a place, but a person who had accepted her for all that she was. The years turned into decades, and the farm became a legend in its own right. Locals whispered about the old farmer and his otherworldly companion, a story that grew with each telling. But for Ed and Leah, the life they built was less about the galaxy's intrigue and more about the quiet, unshakable bond they shared. When Ed eventually passed, it was not with regret, but with gratitude. He left behind a legacy of kindness, resilience, and love that transcended worlds. Leah, though grieving, carried on his work, ensuring the farm thrived in his honor. And under the endless Nebraska sky, she watched the stars, knowing that somewhere, in some way, Ed's spirit lingered, an eternal part of the universe they had both come to cherish. Final reflection, as the galaxy moved on, as planets turned and stars burned bright, the story of Edward Grey and Leah remained, a testament to the power of connection, the courage to face the unknown, and the beauty of two lives intertwined across the vast expanse of existence. In the quiet of her farmhouse, Leah sat on the porch, gazing at the horizon. A gentle breeze rustled the cornfields, carrying with it a whisper of the past, and with a faint smile, she whispered back, "We did well, Edward. We did well." It had been 3 weeks since Edward Gray found Leah collapsed on his farm, a shimmering beacon of otherworldly mystery. Life on the farm had settled into a strange but comfortable rhythm. Leah had integrated seamlessly into Edward's daily routines, her strength returning with each passing day. But her presence brought an undeniable tension that Edward couldn't shake. There were questions, so many questions, that Leah had been reluctant to answer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the cornfields in hues of orange and gold, Edward sat on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee. Leah joined him, her silver hair catching the light like strands of starlight. She was quieter than usual, her luminous eyes fixed on the distant sky. "You've been awful quiet today," Edward said, breaking the silence. "Something on your mind?" Leah hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the blanket draped over her shoulders. "There is much you do not know about me, Edward. Things I feared would put you at risk." Edward raised an eyebrow, setting his mug down. "You've been staying here for weeks, Leah. I think I deserve to know what's going on." Leah's gaze dropped, her voice soft. "You have been kind to me. I did not wish to repay that kindness with danger." "Danger?" Edward leaned forward. "Leah, what kind of danger are we talking about?" She took a deep breath, the glow of her skin dimming slightly as she spoke. "I told you I was being hunted, but it is not just for my knowledge as a researcher. My people's biology makes us vulnerable during certain cycles. I am entering such a cycle now." Edward frowned, the weight of her words settling over him. "What does that mean? What kind of cycle?" Her cheeks flushed faintly, the glow deepening. "It is a mating cycle. During this time, my body emits pheromones that attract others of my kind, and those who would exploit us." Edward blinked, the realization dawning on him. "You mean to say, that's why those hunters were after you?" Leah nodded, her expression somber. "They seek to use me as leverage or worse. And now my presence here puts you in danger as well." Edward leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "Well, that explains a lot. But it doesn't change anything. You're still safer here than out there." Leah looked at him, her silver eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. "You would risk yourself for me, even now?" Edward's voice was firm. "Leah, I told you when I found you. You're not alone anymore." Their fragile peace was shattered the next morning. Edward was in the barn, repairing a tractor when he heard Leah's voice calling his name, urgency laced in every syllable. He dropped his tools and rushed outside to find her standing in the field, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "What is it?" Edward asked, his heart pounding. "They found me," Leah whispered, pointing to a faint shimmer in the sky. 3 sleek, dark ships were descending, their engines emitting a low hum that resonated through the air. Edward clenched his jaw. "Not on my land, they don't." He ran back to the barn, grabbing the shotgun he kept for coyotes and a box of shells. Leah followed, her hands glowing faintly with energy. "We must hide," she urged. "You cannot face them alone." Edward loaded the shotgun with practiced ease. "Hide? This is my land, Leah. I've faced worse than a few trespassers." "These are not mere trespassers," Leah said, her voice trembling. "They will not hesitate to kill." Edward turned to her, his gaze steady. "Then we give them a reason to think twice." The hunters landed in the middle of the cornfield, their ships kicking up clouds of dust and debris. 3 figures emerged, clad in sleek black armor that shimmered like oil under the morning sun. Their movements were precise, predatory. Edward and Leah took cover behind the barn, watching as the hunters fanned out. "They'll search the house first," Leah whispered. "It is the most logical place for me to hide." Edward's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Then we need to draw them away." Before Leah could protest, Edward stepped into view, his shotgun raised. "Hey, you lost or something?" The hunters turned, their glowing visors locking onto him. One of them raised a weapon, but Edward fired first, the buckshot slamming into the ground near their feet. It was enough to scatter them, forcing them to take cover. "Come on!" Edward yelled, retreating toward the barn. The hunters pursued, their weapons lighting up with bursts of energy that sizzled through the air. Leah emerged from the shadows, her hands glowing brighter now. With a sharp motion, she unleashed a wave of energy that struck one of the hunters, sending them sprawling. The other two turned their focus to her, their movements coordinated. "They're not giving up," Edward muttered, firing another shot to keep them at bay. "They will not stop until I am captured or dead," Leah said, her voice grim. "Then we make sure neither of those happens," Edward replied. The hunters landed in the middle of the cornfield, their ships kicking up clouds of dust and debris. 3 figures emerged, clad in sleek black armor that shimmered like oil under the morning sun. Their movements were precise, predatory. Edward and Leah took cover behind the barn, watching as the hunters fanned out. "They'll search the house first," Leah whispered. "It is the most logical place for me to hide." Edward's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Then we need to draw them away." Before Leah could protest, Edward stepped into view, his shotgun raised. "Hey, you lost or something?" The hunters turned, their glowing visors locking onto him. One of them raised a weapon, but Edward fired first, the buckshot slamming into the ground near their feet. It was enough to scatter them, forcing them to take cover. "Come on!" Edward yelled, retreating toward the barn. The hunters pursued, their weapons lighting up with bursts of energy that sizzled through the air. Leah emerged from the shadows, her hands glowing brighter now. With a sharp motion, she unleashed a wave of energy that struck one of the hunters, sending them sprawling. The other two turned their focus to her, their movements coordinated. "They're not giving up," Edward muttered, firing another shot to keep them at bay. "They will not stop until I am captured or dead," Leah said, her voice grim. "Then we make sure neither of those happens," Edward replied. The hunters regrouped, their movements precise and relentless as they closed in on the barn. Edward and Leah retreated to the back, the weight of the battle pressing down on them. Despite their combined efforts, the hunters' advanced tactics and weaponry began to overwhelm them. "We can't keep this up," Edward said, his breath ragged. "Not like this." Leah glanced around the barn, her glowing hands trembling. "There is another way. The bond between us. It connects me to the energy of this place, of the earth itself. I can amplify it." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Amplify it how?" Leah hesitated. "By drawing from your strength. It will be draining, but it may give us a chance." Edward nodded without hesitation. "If it'll save us, do it. I'm not letting these bastards take you." Leah placed her hands on his shoulders, her silver eyes locking onto his. "You must hold on, Edward. This will not be easy." Before he could respond, a surge of energy pulsed through him, radiating outward like a shockwave. The barn trembled as the air around them shimmered, the fields outside lighting up with an ethereal glow. The hunters paused, their movements faltering as the energy threw their instruments into chaos. "What the hell?" Edward muttered, his voice trailing off as his vision sharpened. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, the vibrations of the hunter's boots, and even the rhythm of Leah's breathing. "You are connected now," Leah said, her voice resonating with an otherworldly cadence. "Together we can fight them." The hunters recovered quickly, adapting their tactics to the strange energy surrounding them. They raised their weapons, firing bursts of plasma that tore through the glowing air. But Edward and Leah moved in perfect synchronization, their bond allowing them to anticipate the hunters' attacks. Edward fired his shotgun with newfound precision, each shot forcing the hunters back. Leah unleashed waves of energy that disoriented and immobilized their enemies. The barn became a battleground, its walls scorched and splintered by the relentless onslaught. One of the hunters managed to flank them, raising a weapon aimed directly at Leah. Edward lunged without thinking, his body moving faster than he thought possible. He tackled the hunter to the ground, disarming them with a strength that felt almost superhuman. "Stay down," Edward growled, pinning the hunter as Leah incapacitated them with a surge of energy. The last hunter retreated, their armor sparking from the damage they'd sustained. They activated a beacon on their wrist, signaling their ship for extraction. Within moments, the sleek craft lifted off, leaving a trail of smoke and dust in its wake. Edward lowered his shotgun, his chest heaving as he turned to Leah. "We did it." Leah nodded, her glowing hands dimming as the energy around them faded. "For now, but they will return, and in greater numbers." Edward wiped the sweat from his brow, a determined glint in his eyes. "Then we'll be ready." In the days that followed, Edward and Leah worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable return of the hunters. Edward tapped into his years of farming ingenuity, turning his tools and machinery into makeshift defenses. Leah used her connection to the energy of the land to enhance their preparations, creating barriers and traps that pulsed with faint light. "You're turning my farm into a fortress," Edward said one afternoon as they worked together to reinforce the barn. Leah smiled faintly. "It is already a fortress. You have made it so with your resilience and ingenuity." Edward chuckled. "Never thought I'd be fighting aliens on my own land. Life's full of surprises, huh?" Leah's expression softened. "And yet, you have adapted to each challenge. It is admirable." Edward glanced at her, the sincerity in her voice catching him off guard. "Well, you're not too bad yourself, Leah." Their preparations were tested sooner than they expected. A larger fleet of hunters arrived, their ships descending over the farm with a thunderous roar. This time they came with reinforcements, drones that hovered menacingly over the fields, scanning for any signs of resistance. Edward and Leah took their positions, the defenses they'd built lighting up as the hunters advanced. The drones triggered traps hidden among the crops, bursts of energy and makeshift explosives scattering their formations. Leah stood at the edge of the field, her hands glowing brightly as she directed the energy of the land to shield their position. Edward fired from behind cover, his movements fluid and precise as he held the line. The battle was fierce, the air thick with the hum of weapons and the crackle of energy. Despite their best efforts, the hunters pushed closer, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm them. "We can't hold them off forever," Edward shouted, reloading his shotgun. Leah closed her eyes, her body trembling as she drew deeper from the bond they shared. "There is one last thing I can do, but it will require all of our strength." Edward nodded, his jaw set. "Do it." Leah raised her hands, the glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. Edward felt the energy surge through him again, stronger this time, connecting them to the very fabric of the land. The ground trembled, the air vibrating with a low hum as the energy built to a crescendo. With a sharp motion, Leah released the energy, sending a wave of light cascading across the field. The hunters and their drones were caught in the blast, their ships thrown into disarray as the energy disrupted their systems. When the light faded, the field was quiet. The hunters' ships lifted off, retreating into the sky as their forces withdrew. Edward lowered his shotgun, his legs shaky as he turned to Leah. "Did we win?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Leah nodded weakly, her glow dimming as she leaned against him for support. "For now, but they will not stop." Edward wrapped an arm around her, steadying her as they walked back to the barn. "Then neither will we." The morning after their hard-fought battle dawned quiet, the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the cornfields. Edward sat on the porch, sipping his coffee, his weathered face showing the weariness of the fight. Leah stood nearby, her luminous silver eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting another attack at any moment. "They'll be back, won't they?" Edward asked, breaking the silence. Leah nodded, her expression somber. "They will, and next time they may bring forces even we cannot stop." Edward leaned back in his chair, his hand running over the smooth wood of his shotgun. "Well, then we'd better make sure this place is ready. Got a few tricks left up my sleeve." Leah turned to him, her gaze softening. "You have already done more than anyone could have asked. I cannot keep putting you in danger like this." Edward met her eyes, his voice steady. "Leah, this is my home. I fought for it before, and I'll fight for it again. You're part of it now. We're in this together." For the first time since the battle, a faint smile touched her lips. "Then together, we will prepare." While fortifying the farm, Edward and Leah made an unexpected discovery. Beneath one of the fields, hidden among the roots of the corn, they found strange glowing crystals, pulsing faintly with energy that felt alive. Leah knelt beside one of the shards, her glowing hands hovering over it. These are not of Earth," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "They resonate with my energy." Edward crouched beside her, studying the crystals. "What does that mean? Are they yours?" Leah shook her head. "Not mine, but they may be connected to why I was drawn here. These crystals are amplifiers, conductors of life energy. They are rare, even in my galaxy." Edward scratched his chin. "So what? We've got some kind of alien treasure buried under my farm." "Not treasure," Leah corrected, "but a source of immense power. If we can harness it, we may be able to repel the hunters for good." Edward stood, his mind racing. "All right then. Let's figure out how to use these things." Over the next few days, Leah worked tirelessly to understand the crystal's energy. Using her natural connection to them, she began to weave their power into the defenses they'd already built. Edward watched in quiet awe as she transformed ordinary machinery into tools of extraordinary strength. The old irrigation system became a network of energy conduits, capable of generating shields around the barn and house. The worn-out generator in the shed now hummed with a quiet, steady pulse, its power magnified by the crystals. Leah also taught Edward how to connect to the crystals himself. Though he lacked her innate abilities, their bond allowed him to tap into the energy in small but significant ways. He could feel the pulse of the land more clearly now, the quiet strength of the crystals flowing through him. "You're a quick learner," Leah said one evening as they tested the defenses. "Good teacher," Edward replied with a faint smile. Leah looked at him, her silver eyes glowing softly in the twilight. "We are stronger together. I never thought I would find someone like you, Edward." He met her gaze, his voice quiet but firm. "We make a good team." The hunters returned with a vengeance. This time they brought more ships, more soldiers, and heavier weapons. The sky darkened as their fleet descended, the low hum of their engines shaking the ground. Edward and Leah stood at the edge of the field, watching as the ships formed a line above the cornfields. "They're not holding back this time," Edward muttered, gripping his shotgun. Leah's hands began to glow, her connection to the crystals radiating outward. "Neither will we." The first wave came swiftly, drones darting through the air, firing bursts of plasma that scorched the earth. The shields flared to life, the crystal's energy repelling the attacks with brilliant flashes of light. Edward took aim, firing at the drones with deadly precision, while Leah directed the energy toward the advancing soldiers. Despite their defenses, the hunters pressed forward, their tactics ruthless and coordinated. Edward felt the strain of the battle weighing on him, but the bond he shared with Leah kept him going. Every move they made was in sync, their connection amplifying their strength. At the height of the battle, one of the hunters broke through the defenses, heading straight for Leah. Edward saw it first, his body moving before his mind could catch up. He tackled the hunter, grappling with the armored figure as they rolled across the ground. Leah turned, her eyes blazing with light. She raised her hands, sending a surge of energy toward the hunter. The armor cracked, and the figure collapsed, defeated. "Are you all right?" Leah asked, rushing to Edward's side. He nodded, breathing heavily. Still in one piece. As the battle raged on, the crystals began to pulse with greater intensity, their energy spreading across the field. Leah knelt beside one of the larger shards, placing her hands on its surface. "They're responding to the fight," she said, her voice filled with awe. "They're alive." Edward wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing at the glowing field. "Can they end this?" Leah hesitated. "They can, but it will require everything we have. Are you ready?" Edward's jaw tightened, his voice steady. "Do it." Leah closed her eyes, focusing all her energy on the crystals. Edward stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder as the bond between them deepened. The crystals glowed brighter, their light spreading across the field like a wave. The hunters faltered, their ships and weapons disrupted by the surge of energy. One by one they retreated, their forces scattering into the sky. When the last ship vanished into the distance, Edward and Leah collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but victorious. The battlefield was eerily quiet as the dust settled. The cornfields, once lush and green, were scorched and littered with debris. The glow of the crystals began to fade, their energy retreating into the earth like embers after a fire. Edward and Leah sat together on the porch steps of the farmhouse, their bodies aching from the battle. Edward broke the silence first, his voice rough but steady. "We did it." Leah, her silver hair disheveled and glowing faintly, nodded. "For now. They will think twice before returning, but this is not the end." Edward sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It never is it?" Leah turned to him, her gaze soft but resolute. "You have shown strength far beyond what I expected, Edward. Your resilience, your ability to adapt, it is extraordinary." Edward chuckled dryly. "Not bad for an old farmer, huh?" Leah's lips curved into a faint smile. "Not bad at all." As they began to assess the damage to the farm, Leah noticed something unusual near one of the larger crystals. It pulsed faintly, emitting a rhythmic hum that resonated through the air. She knelt beside it, her glowing hands hovering over the surface. "This is new," she murmured, her voice filled with curiosity. Edward walked over, his shotgun slung across his back. "What's it doing?" Leah closed her eyes, her expression focused. "It's transmitting. A signal, but not one from the hunters." Edward frowned. "Then who's it from?" Leah stood, her eyes widening. "It's a distress call, from others like me." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying there are more of you out there, in trouble?" She nodded, her expression grim. "If this signal is reaching us, it means they are close. Perhaps too close." The discovery of the distress signal changed everything. Leah explained that her people, though scattered across the galaxy, maintained a network of energy signatures that allowed them to communicate in emergencies. The crystals on Edward's farm, she realized, were part of that network. "This farm," she said, her voice steady, "is more than a sanctuary. It is a node in a much larger system. The hunters were not just after me, they were after this connection." Edward leaned against the barn door, his brow furrowed. "So what happens now? We go find your people?" Leah hesitated. "The signal is weak, but it is close. If we follow it, we may find others like me, or more hunters." Edward straightened, his resolve hardening. "Then we go. I didn't fight off those bastards just to sit here and wait for the next attack." Leah smiled faintly. "You are remarkable, Edward Gray." "Just a stubborn old man," he replied with a grin. "Now, let's figure out how we're going to track that signal." Using the energy from the crystals, Leah managed to amplify the signal and pinpoint its origin. It led them to a dense forest miles away from the farm, where the terrain grew wild and uncharted. Edward loaded his truck with supplies, including the crystal-powered devices they had fashioned during their preparations. As they drove, the bond between them deepened. Leah shared more about her world, her people, and the struggles they faced as a species hunted for their abilities. Edward listened intently, his respect for her growing with each word. "You've been through hell," he said as they neared the edge of the forest. "But you're still standing. That's something." Leah glanced at him, her silver eyes shimmering. "I could say the same about you." They reached the signal's origin just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. A clearing opened before them, revealing another crystalline structure embedded in the ground. It pulsed faintly, its energy weaker than the crystals on Edward's farm. "They're here," Leah whispered, her voice trembling. "But they're not alone." Edward's hand instinctively went to his shotgun. "What do you mean?" Before Leah could answer, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was another of her kind, their luminous features dimmed by exhaustion. But behind them, the telltale hum of a hunter's ship grew louder. The hunter's ship descended quickly, its engines kicking up dirt and debris as it landed near the clearing. Edward and Leah moved into position, their weapons ready. The other aliens staggered toward them, their voice weak but pleading. "Help me," they said, collapsing just as the hunters began to emerge. Leah ran to their side, her hands glowing as she began to stabilize them. Edward stepped forward, his shotgun raised. "You've got a lot of nerve coming back here," He called out to the hunters, his voice steady. "This is my land, and I don't take kindly to trespassers." The hunters didn't respond, their movements precise as they surrounded the clearing. Edward fired the first shot, the blast echoing through the forest. Leah joined the fight, using the energy from the crystals to create barriers and disorient their enemies. The battle was fierce, but Edward and Leah fought with a determination that couldn't be matched. Together, they drove the hunters back, forcing their ship to retreat once more. When the dust settled, the clearing was quiet. Edward turned to Leah, his chest heaving. "That's twice now we've sent them packing. Think they'll get the message?" Leah shook her head, her gaze shifting to the injured alien at her feet. "Not yet, but this is just the beginning." Back at the farm, the injured alien began to recover under Leah's care. They introduced themselves as Corin, a researcher who had been separated from their group after a failed escape. Corin confirmed Leah's fears. The hunters were not just after individuals, they were targeting the entire network of crystals. "We must protect this place," Corin said, their voice weak but resolute. "It is one of the last nodes in the system. If it falls, the network will collapse." Edward glanced at Leah, his expression serious. "Looks like we've got more work to do." Leah nodded, her resolve firm. "We cannot do this alone. We will need allies, both from Earth and beyond." Edward's lips curved into a faint smile. "Well, lucky for you, I've got a lot of stubborn left in me." Together, they began to prepare for the next phase of their fight, a battle not just for survival, but for the preservation of a network that connected worlds. The farm, once a quiet sanctuary, had become a fortress of hope, and Edward and Leah stood as its first line of defense. The days following the rescue of Corin were a blur of preparation and reflection. Edward's farm, once a haven of peace, was now a hub of intergalactic strategy. Leah and Corin worked tirelessly to strengthen the farm's crystal network, their combined energy creating a barrier that shimmered faintly over the fields. "You've got this place glowing like Christmas," Edward quipped as he adjusted one of the reinforced barriers. Leah glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "The network is responding to our efforts. The crystals are awakening." Corin stepped forward, their features more vibrant now that they had recovered. "The hunters will not stop. We must activate the full potential of this node to repel them permanently." "And how do we do that?" Edward asked, resting his shotgun against the porch railing. "The bond," Leah said softly, her silver eyes meeting Edward's. "The connection we share is the key. Your willingness to fight, to protect, it amplifies the crystal's power." Edward looked at her, a mix of pride and determination in his gaze. "Then let's get to it." That night, Edward and Leah stood at the center of the largest crystal on the farm. The air vibrated with energy, the hum of the crystals growing louder as the network came alive. Corin guided them, their hands glowing as they channeled the energy into a focused beam. "Place your hands on the crystal," Corin instructed. "Together, you must align your intentions with the network." Edward hesitated for a moment, then placed his weathered hand beside Leah's. A surge of warmth spread through him, the bond between them intensifying. The crystal pulsed brightly, its light spreading across the farm and into the sky. As the energy expanded, Edward felt a deep connection, not just to Leah, but to the land, the crystals, and the vast network they were part of. It was as if the entire galaxy resonated with their combined strength. "They're coming," Leah said, her voice steady. "But this time, we are ready." The hunters' fleet arrived at dawn, their ships blotting out the morning sky. This time their numbers were overwhelming, and their weapons glowed with an intensity that promised destruction. But the farm was no longer defenseless. The crystal network hummed with energy, its light creating a protective dome that shielded the fields and the farmhouse. Leah and Corin stood at the forefront, their hands glowing as they directed the energy into concentrated beams. Edward took his position, shotgun in hand. Despite the overwhelming odds, his heart was steady. He glanced at Leah, her silver hair shimmering in the light of the crystals. "Let's send them packing," he said, his voice firm. Leah nodded, her gaze unwavering. Together, the battle was fierce. The hunters' ships unleashed waves of plasma that struck the crystal shield, but the network held firm. Edward moved with precision, firing at drones and soldiers that attempted to breach the barrier. Leah and Corin channeled the crystal's power into devastating bursts of energy, their combined efforts overwhelming the enemy. At the height of the battle, the largest hunter ship descended, its weapons aimed directly at the main crystal node. Edward and Leah exchanged a glance, their bond stronger than ever. "We have to stop it," Leah said, her voice urgent. Edward nodded. "Tell me what to do." Leah placed her hands on the crystal, motioning for Edward to do the same. "Focus. Think of everything you're fighting for. The farm, the people you love, the future we can protect." Edward closed his eyes, his thoughts aligning with hers. The crystal pulsed brightly, its light blinding as it unleashed a surge of energy that struck the hunter ship. The explosion shook the ground, sending shockwaves through the air as the remaining ships retreated. When the light faded, the sky was clear. The hunters were gone. In the days that followed, the farm returned to a peaceful rhythm. The crystals, now fully integrated into the network, pulsed softly with a comforting glow. Leah and Corin worked to stabilize the connections, ensuring that the node would remain a beacon of strength for the galaxy. Edward sat on the porch, watching as the sun set over the fields. Leah joined him, her expression serene as she settled into the chair beside him. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "We did it," Edward corrected, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Couldn't have done it without you." Leah smiled, her silver eyes shimmering. "You have given me more than I ever thought possible, Edward. A home, a purpose." Edward turned to her, his weathered face softening. "And you've done the same for me." As the stars began to appear in the sky, the two of them sat in comfortable silence, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. The farm, once an isolated haven, had become a symbol of resilience and unity, a testament to what could be achieved when two worlds came together. And as the galaxy continued to turn, Edward and Leah prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together they could face anything.